The first being that I'm a young history major. I'm only taking about 30 hours of courses in the history department, so I wouldn't say that I'm the most academic person ever, and so therefore I've still got a lot of learning to do about the empire itself. And then the word contemporary speaks really well about what I think I'm about to present, because of the fact that I have not received much education on the topic of the Mongolian Empire, which, surprise, surprise, is not usually something that history professors or teachers will want to talk about, because we live in America and it's not super relevant to talk about empires that happened 800 years ago. So I just haven't had a lot of education on the topic, and I haven't really been pointed that to a lot of academic study. I wrote a paper about the Mongolian Empire last semester, but that's really been the utmost I've jumped into the academic study of this great empire. So that's more of just a disclaimer, but I mean, to tell you the truth, most everything I'm going to say is probably accurate, but it's accurate to the best of my ability. So that's just what I want to say about that. And then the world's greatest empire portion is something that I hope to present throughout the course of this short soapbox. So first, I just want to ask you guys a question about what you guys have heard about the Mongolian Empire. So if you guys just want to give a shout out, what's the imagery that comes to your head when you think about the Mongolians?
Horse riding archers.
Horse riding archers, that's a good call.
Genghis Khan.
Village, yeah, barbarians, right? For the most part, you guys are not that far off. There's a lot, you guys are, for the most part, pretty much right, but there's more to that, of course. And particularly, I want to talk about the idea that the Mongols are barbarians. I think this may not be the exact image of horse archers with the gigantic clay ones there, but otherwise, this is pretty much the mental image I think that most people have when they think about the Mongolian Empire. There are these men that just go around and take over towns, shoot arrows at people and burn places to the ground and go bar, bar, bar all the time. And again, that's pretty consistent with some of the stuff they do. I mean, they do have a lot of horse archers. They do create quite a lot of chaos in the towns that they've taken over. But they don't go bar, bar, bar all the time. They have civilization and something that they've done that's extraordinary in history. So to start off, we're going to talk, one of the reasons why they're so notable is this idea of pure territorial expansion. They are, without a doubt, the most efficient conquering force in the history of the world. All that stuff that you see there, that's in the first picture, is what the stuff they conquered. They started conquering territory in 1206, so they're able to conquer pretty much the majority of the landmass of Asia, with the exception of Indochina and Persia, and some of the steppes of Russia, and of course the Middle East, within roughly 76-year period. They're able to conquer pretty much all of Asia. And I'll show you some more maps that will even point to what else they do, even in just the 25 years in which Genghis Khan is conquering. You guys will notice that there's a Roman Empire on the right, and the Roman Empire is able to conquer that much land, so the majority of Europe, in about 400 years. And so the Mongols are able to take over. What you see there is about 11 million square miles of territory the Mongols have managed to take over in such a short amount of time. And we'll talk about how they get to that point. First, we've got to talk about where did this all start with. And the idea behind that is basically, who were the Mongols? This is a simple picture of them. That's actually the background to my phone, my lock screen. I love this picture. Nathan's going on the phone right now. If you really want to see, that's the background to my phone. They are possibly the most unlikely source for an empire that's ever started. What you see is actually a really good representation of who they are. They are a group of nomadic sheep herders, and really that's what, if you were to think about, even the clan that Genghis Khan comes from is not even the biggest sheep herding clan in Mongolia. So for them to take over an empire that's the size of pretty much Asia in 25 years is you couldn't even imagine how that happened. And so what changed Mongolia from being this group of nomadic sheep herders was Temujin. I'm not trying to be Mr. Old Man History and say that one man came and wrecked everything, but in the Mongolian case, Genghis Khan is really the only reason why the Mongols have become as powerful as they did. His name is actually Temujin in Mongolian culture. Genghis Khan is just a title that's given to him, like Imperator Augustus Caesar is the name for Octavian. Temujin was a young man who was born in around the time periods of late 1100, and honestly, there's not a ton of history about his backstory except for a source called The Secret History of the Mongols, which I'll talk about maybe towards the end of the resource if you're interested in studying more about the Mongolian Empire. This secret history of the Mongols tells the story of Temujin being a 9-year-old boy, and his father, who's the king of a particular clan of nomadic sheep herders in Mongolia, takes him to another clan to select a wife at 9 years old that he's going to choose to marry at 12 years old. They do that just so that she remains pure for him during the time until he grows up and is actually able to produce children. So that's what he does. But on the return journey, Genghis Khan's father, Temujin's father, dies, and he's poisoned by a different tribe of people, which is a really frustrating thing for him, because when he goes back to his tribe, they say, like, we can't accept you because you're only 9 years old. We can't submit to your leadership. And so they abandoned Temujin, his brothers, and his mother to lead by themselves in the Mongolian wasteland. And so he grows up in incredible poverty, and pretty much him and his brothers and his mother are living on the hunting that they're able to hunt, the food that they're able to get through hunting. And so, unfortunately, Temujin is just pretty weak. And the only thing that really goes his way for him during this period is his meeting with a guy named Jamuka. I'm going to throw probably a couple of names out there that I'm absolutely sure I'm not pronouncing correctly, and will probably be hard to remember, but they're really passionate for me. You guys are captive audience, so let's throw them out there. Jamuka is a son of an additional clan leader who's called the Khan, which you guys will learn more about, of course. He's the son of this clan leader, and he becomes blood brothers with Temujin along the way. And so they have this eternal bond where they're basically brothers, even though they're from different mothers. And so they're able just to make that friendship. And that comes out to help Temujin, because when he gets old enough and decides to marry his wife, a rival tribe comes in and steals her and gives her to another man, which is a common practice in the Mongolian countryside. In fact, Genghis Khan's mother was captured in the same way, married his father. And it was actually the same tribe that his mother was from, the same tribe that stole his wife. So it's almost like a revenge type of thing. But Genghis Khan decides to take his own revenge on this tribe, and he calls his friend Jamuka, who's a Khan leader by now, to take his forces and ride against these guys. And so he does that. They're able to defeat this tribe. It's taken his wife. He gets his wife back. 9 months later, she gives birth to a son. And that son is named Jochi. He becomes really important in the succession of the Mongolian Empire post Genghis Khan. But the question about him is that since Genghis Khan's wife was married to another man and had a son 9 months afterwards, Jochi's parentage is disputed. And as I said, that comes up later when Genghis Khan is trying to decide who he wants to be. And so I'm going to show a quick picture of Jamuka, who becomes really important in Genghis Khan. As he takes over this tribe, what happens is he allies himself with this guy named Jamuka and another one of his father's friends, who are able to give him a bunch of people, a bunch of land. He's able to basically offer himself as a military strategist to these guys, and he gains a lot of power in this way. And he's an excellent military strategist, Genghis Khan is. What he's able to do is he's able to take over a bunch of the tribes in Mongolia. And what he does is something that's really exceptional to make him a more powerful figure. What he does is he kills the rich and he kills the heavy political figures of the tribes, but he leaves the poor alive, which is different than what other Mongolian people would do. Instead, they take over the tribes and just let the poor fend for themselves out in the Mongolian wilderness. But Genghis knows what that's like, because that's what he's just done all of his life. And so what he does is he adopts them into his crowd, and he offers them protection, and thus his power becomes even stronger than other Mongolian tribesmen. And another thing that he does that's really it's like a well-done thing, but he promotes people in the tribe based on merit rather than family. And so he's able to get people that are qualified for positions within his clanship, and he rises to power. He eventually gets to the point where there's only 13 tribes left in all of Mongolia that oppose him. And what they decide to do at this point is they know that he's powerful enough to defeat all of them individually. And so they decide to come together and they elect Jamuka as their leader, which puts him at a direct conflict with Genghis. And unfortunately, the blood brothership that is between the two men is broken. They have to go to war in 1206. And Genghis Khan is able to win. He defeats Jamuka. And what he does with that is normally you just go ahead and kill the person that you've taken over. But what happens is Jamuka is betrayed by his friends to Genghis, who just know he's powerful enough, they want to be on his good side. He's betrayed to them, and they bring him to Genghis. What Genghis does is something that's really surprising, and it actually changes the way that the Mongolian Empire operates. What he does is he kills the people who betrayed his friend Jamaka, and then what he does is he tells Jamaka, I'm going to try to keep you alive because you've been a blood brother. He tries to like reconnect the friendship between the two men that they once had. And Jamaka says, you know, I love that you've done this, but I think that there's no way that he says a quote that I can't say correctly, but there's no way that like two moons can operate under the sun. And basically saying there's no way that one of us can both of us can be in power at the same time. So he tells Genghis, the only thing I want to do is to die a noble death, which in Mongolian culture means not drawing blood. So Genghis Khan breaks his back and his best friend is killed. But he asks to be killed that way. So Genghis becomes Genghis Khan at this point. And the words Genghis Khan mean great Khan, Khan in English meaning king. So he basically adopts this position of great king. He's elected this position after unifying all of Mongolia. Afterwards, Genghis goes over and takes over all that territory that you see. By the time 1227, Genghis Khan has captured the northernmost portion of China. He's captured pretty much everything from Mongolia to the Caspian Sea, which, as I said before, is an alarming and incredibly quick way of conquering so much land. So Genghis easily becomes the man that has the most land under his jurisdiction in all history. So that's one of the reasons why I love the Mongolian Empire. I love Genghis Khan, because he's able to do things so efficiently. We've got to ask the question. Genghis gets to a point where he's old enough to pass away, and he knows he's about to pass away. He takes over the Caspian Sea, and he goes back to Mongolia, and he says, what am I going to do? I've got 4 sons by this point. You guys will remember Jochi, whose parentage is disputed. He's got 3 other family names who, again, they're Mongolian names. They're Chagatai, they are Ojdai, and they're Tulti. You guys won't remember those, but it's all right. It's not super important. Anyway, he's got these 4 sons, and he's deciding where to give leadership to. And he has to make a couple of decisions that are really important. You can see all 4 sons there, oldest to youngest, left to right. So he decides to give this power to his 3rd son, which is strange. You'd think he'd give it immediately to the oldest son, but again, the oldest son, he is not, we don't know if actually Genghis doesn't even know if it's his actual son. So there's disputed there. And then Genghis Khan's 2nd son, whose name is Chagatai, and his 4th son, whose name is Tulchi, are really big hotheads. They like to fight against each other. They have really different interpretations of what should be done in the Mongolian Empire. And Genghis knows that if he elects one of them to become the title of Supreme Khan, they'll probably end up in a civil war against each other and kill each other. So what they decide to do then is he puts his 3rd son on the throne. And actually this ends up being for the best, because the 3rd son is an incredibly charming guy. All of the brothers like him. All of the government officials like him. He's just a good-natured, really just a good old boy that everybody really enjoys. In fact, he's such a good character that he's even hesitant to take this throne position. As I'll talk about later, his brothers actually have to wrestle him to the ground and put him on the throne to make him king over that massive amount of territory that I showed you guys just a second ago. So he's a really good guy, and people like him. We'll talk quickly about Genghis Khan's oldest son, whose name is Jochi. What happens to Jochi is he knows he's probably not going to become Khan, and he decides to. When Genghis is about to die, he calls all of the brothers to Mongolia, so he can, all of his sons to Mongolia, so he can kind of give his farewell wishes. What happens to Jochi is he decides he doesn't want to even come. And so he never sees his father again. He goes to the Caspian Sea and sits there until his death, which actually is a year before Genghis Khan. And historians have tried to figure out why this happened. Why did the son not come back? And then why does he die so suddenly right before his father did? And the leading suggestion, although I don't think I like it so much, is that Jochi was really angry about the fact that he knew he wasn't going to be the next Khan over all that territory. And he decides in a secret attempt to assassinate his father, who's about to just die. Sans he's going to like it so much because Genghis is going to die anyway. I don't think Jochi would have thought that through altogether if he had actually tried to kill his father. But anyway, Jochi goes ahead and maybe with this plan, and his father actually hears about it, kills him before his son can kill him. So Jochi passes away really quickly right before Genghis does, and so he's left with just 3 sons. The most important one, the one that I've just written a paper about last semester, is about this guy named Tuli. He's the youngest son of Genghis Khan. What's really exceptional about the Mongolian, just the way that they operate, is that the inheritance is actually passed down to the youngest son instead of the oldest one. So what happens is Tulchi actually, instead, he doesn't get all of the empire, but he immediately gets the homeland, which is Mongolia, of course, and he gets all of his father's wives, his father's possessions, just the stuff that kind of just kept in his personal safes. Tolchi gets. And he actually, during the 2-year period, there's a 2-year period between Ojidai becoming Khan and Genghis dying. And actually, Tolchi rules over all of the Mongolian territory as just like an acting emperor at this time. But in a surprising move, what Tolchi does is he decides to give this to his brother. And I thought that was an incredibly strange act of history because, I mean, if you look at ancient history, brothers don't usually just give positions and stuff. They usually kill their brothers. In fact, Genghis is actually, the secret history of the Mongols says that in one particular scenario, when him and his brothers were fighting for food, his oldest brother wasn't giving out the portions accordingly and only giving food to like himself and one of his other half-brothers instead of to Genghis and his mother and his brother. So Genghis and his other brother went ahead and killed their brother to get more food. So this is even something that this is something that's unique even in the instance of their family, to them just to give all this power. And not only just to give all this power, but the most land that anybody has ever produced in history up to that point, and even now in today's history to that point. So why did he renounce this title of Supreme Khan was the question I tried to answer. And I kind of got it down to about 3 reasons. One, the Mongolian Empire has got enemies on all sides. This is where the Mongolian Empire is at the point of Genghis Khan's death, and they want to start making expansions into China, into Baghdad, and into Europe. They feel like they've got the opportunity to do so. But in the time since Genghis Khan's died, these countries have noticed, well, the Mongols are kind of holding off their attack. We might as well start mobilizing so it becomes really hard for them to attack. And I know that I think what the reason why Tolchi doesn't attack, or doesn't just say, I'm going to be emperor, I'm going to be the Supreme Khan instead of his brothers, because he knows that these three are building up, and they'll probably attack the Mongolian Empire pretty soon if there's too much of a time that's taken in between. And of course, since Tolchi knows that him and his now oldest brother, don't have a great relationship, if there's a civil war, these 3 are easily going to come in. These 3 enemies are easily going to come in and collapse the empire. The other reason is because Tolchi knows he's an excellent military strategist. Out of the 4 brothers, he's the one that, he was really Genghis Khan's favorite son. He was the one that sat next to him. He's the one that listened to his father talk about all the military strategy. And he knows that this is something that he's very good at. He also knows that he's not nearly as charming and as good-natured as his older brother, Ojidai. And so he knows that it's probably not the best thing for him to be an administrator. And it's probably best for the Mongolian Empire as a whole for him to serve the empire as a military strategist. And to make and he actually ends up doing that and going into expeditions into China. And finally is this, he has this incredible love for his brother that comes from the story, the history of the world conqueror, another primary source talks about. This story is that Genghis took his sons aside one day and he took a quiver of arrows and he would start breaking the arrows one by one and he'd tell his sons, to get, individually you were weak, but then he'd take a big quiver of arrows and try to break them, and of course he couldn't. He'd say, together you guys are strong, and your enemies will be vanquished before you. And so Tolchi just knows that he has this idea of family, community, that's really important, and so he decides to just go ahead, and he loves his brother, for goodness sakes. Like I mentioned before, he wrestled his brother onto the throne. There's even a point where Tolchi said to his brother's really hesitant. OJ is like a really good guy, doesn't want to get anybody mad, and doesn't want to get anybody frustrated or even get to the point where people don't want him to be Khan. He just wants to be on everybody's good side. And so he's really hesitant to take this throne because he's like, well, Tolchi, you're a lot smarter than I am. You're a better military strategist. And Chagatai, you're my older brother. I'm in fact the person that's least likely to take this role. And Tolchi, one of the primary sources says that Tolchi just rolls his eyes and said, get on the throne, you old ox, in Mongolia. Because Ojidai is a really big dude. He's I don't know if I should give him justice, but he is significantly overweight. So that's what happened. So this is what happened under Ojidai Khan. The Mongolian Empire, as you guys will remember, just went to the Caspian Sea and it conquered pretty much most of the Uzbekistan, the Stans of current Russia. But now what they've done is they've taken over all of China. They've pushed into Baghdad. They've taken over all of Iran, as you guys can see. They've taken over all of Ukraine, moved into Poland. And so what's exceptional about this is they now own significant territory in 2 different continents. And actually they're about to, if there was a defeat, an army of Mamelukes, which was an army in Saudi Arabia at the time, had defeated the Mongols, and the Mongols were trying to get into North Africa, and likely would have. They had the military might to be able to conquer a large portion of North Africa, but one last stand by the army of Mamelukes kept them out of there. So had that had that battle worked to the Mongolian side, they would have owned significant territory in 3 different civilizations. And right, they would have been like the empire that conquered the most land in history of all of the earth. Now, right now they're number 2 because the British Empire was able to conquer a lot of territory at different portions of the world. In fact, the British Empire owned significant territory in 5 continents of the world, but it wasn't continuous. The Mongols have the largest continuous land mass in history, and they certainly would have if they'd been able to conquer North Africa had that not happened. But anyway, Tolchi's decision makes the Mongolian Empire this massive red spot on most of the known world. So it's pretty spectacular. So now we got to get to the question of how did they conquer this Asian continent so efficiently? And that's something that you just got to consider whenever you talk about the Mongols. The first thing they do is what Levi kind of mentioned earlier. They have this archery system. Mongolian horses are really cool. I don't know enough about their height. I don't know the science behind it, but for some reason they're just really fast. They have really good what's the term I'm looking for? You can run for stamina. They've got incredible endurance stamina, and this is exceptional compared to other armies. And the Mongols are really good guerrilla warfare fighters. They're able to launch their arrows and run back really quickly before the armies of the regions they're taking over can even have a chance to go against them. And so the Mongolian archers are very good. The other thing that they do is the Mongols are incredibly adaptable, and I'll talk about that here even more in a second. But they are really willing, they're able to look at a situation and change things. And so when they run into castles in Europe and in Baghdad in particular, they've never seen them before. Remember, they're nomadic sheep herders. They've never run into situations where they even have things like permanent buildings, because they would have these little tents called yurts where they go around, and so and they live that way. So instead, they run into these castles, and they're like, "What do we do?" And so they interrogate a few prisoners, and they're able to build siege weaponry just on the fly like that, and take over significant castles. And that's why they're able to take over these cities like Baghdad and whatever else. Another thing the Mongols do that's really cool is they of course are in China, and they take gunpowder from China, and probably are the ones that introduced gunpowder to the Europeans at the time. And so they use that in their siege weaponry as well, but they also introduce it to the European continent, which is something that's really cool as well. I'll talk about that even more later. And finally, one of the other reasons they're able to take this over so quickly is the cities know the Mongols are coming, and they just give up. They just they really do. The Mongols are really, they're a brutal tribe. They're not unusually brutal. They kill a lot of people. I think it's it's in the millions of amount of people they kill in the conquests, which is, that's what you got to do if you're going to take that much territory. But cities just know they're coming. They just say we surrender, and that's usually what ends up happening. The last reason I even put on this slide, I don't really like to talk about because I like to think the Mongols are the coolest thing ever. A lot of that territory in the stands of Europe, of Asia, is pastoral and desert land, and nobody wants to live there. So they take over a lot of that territory, but it doesn't require that much taking over. And so there are cities there, but there's also a lot of just pastoral land. And so that's just another reason why the Mongols are able to conquer so much territory. So my question now is how did the world change because of this tribe? And you guys will see the ancient world is significantly influenced by the Mongols. And really, I can make the argument, and I'm not so sure that it's well founded in this, but I think the Mongols have changed the world more than any other civilization. It's definitely in the ancient world, and I maybe try to make an argument that, might last, might not last, towards the end of things that have changed the shape of the modern world, but definitely the ancient world. They changed the ancient world by doing this thing called the Silk Road. The Silk Road was this trade network of routes that was in Europe, that was in Persia, that was in China. And basically what it was is just trade routes. And people had established this before the Mongolian Empire. But of course, it's a really long route, and it takes years to get from Europe to China at this point. And if you guys know anything about Marco Polo, you guys will know that trip he took lasted 2 to 3 years of traveling. And I think it may be more than that. I don't know as much about Marco Polo as I probably should. But yeah, the travel is incredibly long to get to one side of the way to the other. And of course, there's a lot of bandits along the road that are willing to try to jump trade caravans. What the Mongols do is they clear out banditry in the region, and they're able to make it so that the Silk Road is easily able to travel on it. One historian once said that, I'm not sure if this quote exactly right, because it's really cool. It was said that a man could walk from one side of the Mongolian Empire to the other with a gold plate on his head and not be harmed. And so that's how And that's how really safe they made it to be. The other thing that the Mongols do is this religious tolerance that's really not ever, it is not, what's the word I'm looking for, unheard. It's unheard of in the ancient world for people to be as religiously tolerant as the Mongols are. The Mongols are shamanists. They believe in that gods are, the gods that have created this earth that really are just in the steppes of Mongolia, just in these Mongolian mountains. And so, as a result, when they take over all this territory, these people who have never heard of Mongolia really never had the opportunity to hear about these gods beforehand. So the Mongols don't try to come in and just convert people to the shamanist religion. Instead, what they do is they just let people operate under whatever religion they want to. And so, at a particular point in the Mongolian Empire, 4 of the 5 major religions are operating fully. Hindus, Buddhists, Christians, and Muslims are all under the banner of the Mongolian Empire. And I don't know, you can look into it more and more if you're interested, but I'm pretty sure that at some point there were some Jews that lived in the Mongolian Empire as well, which would make all 5 major world religions under the category of Mongolian Empire. So that's something that's just super cool about it. Another reason I like them a lot. The mixing of culture. This is something that's really cool about the Mongols. So they've taken over a lot of territory, but they're nomadic sheep herders, and that's their background. And so what they end up doing is they take people in the territories that they've conquered who are educated, government officials, artisans, people that are in this culture, musicians and artists, and they take them and they strategically put them throughout the empire so to spread culture and to be able to really administer the empire effectively. And so what they're able to do with that is they're able to create this mixing of culture that historians get really excited about. When you talk about, you guys will hear about how important Alexander the Great was in spreading Hellenistic Greek ideas throughout the territory that he conquered. The Mongols are able to do the same thing, of course, just on a bigger scale. And so I like that a lot. And finally, the descendants of Genghis Khan. If there's anything you guys might know about him, is that 16 million people on the earth claim direct descendants to Genghis Khan. And you guys can imagine how that happened. What I've got here is these circles that represent people groups of Asia, and I believe that every, you can see the key there, every area that's marked in the blue is the percentage of the people in that particular group that claim direct descendants to Genghis Khan. So you guys will see areas like Inner Mongolia, there's almost a fourth of the people who say, I'm a direct descendant of Genghis Khan, which is really cool. So there's, again, 16 million people on the face of the earth that have the same star cluster chromosomes. I don't know how science works exactly, but I think that's how it works as well. So that's pretty cool. And so that's something that's really cool. So anyway, I've presented my case on why I think they're so cool. And the Mongols do anything wrong. If you guys have already read the quote, this is standard Genghis Khan stuff where he said, the greatest pleasure is to vanquish your enemies and to chase them before you, to rob them of their wealth, to see those dear to them bathed in tears, to ride their horses and to clasp to your bosom their wives and daughters. His favorite thing. That's what he said. And so that stands for itself. I don't need to provide any extra explanation. But you can see now why this guy wanted to conquer so much with this. So, along the way, the Mongols directly killed millions of people and indirectly killed millions of people. Of course, in conquering the amount of territory that they had to kill millions of people that were in their way. And that's, I write that off, and I probably shouldn't. And then just like something standard empire stuff, And the Romans do the same thing. The Mongols just kill more people because they're on a bigger scale. So they just conquer more land, so therefore more people die. And that's, I'm maybe being a little insensitive, but that's just what happens. So, and also indirectly, they kill a lot of people. So when the Mongols open up this trade network that I've talked about on the Silk Road, what they do is they allow for disease to spread as well. And not only do they open up just that great land territory, but there's these ships that start traveling from the Middle East to India and to China as well. And on those ships, fleas with this thing called the Black Plague by rats. Rats get into Europe, and it kills roughly a third of the population of Europe. And so I don't say that's it's technically the Mongols' fault, because if trade doesn't happen, then that doesn't happen. So I don't necessarily say, well, the Mongols are bad because they did that. It's just what happened as a result of the trade that happened. So the Mongols did do a lot of stuff wrong. They killed millions of people directly and indirectly, but they're still awesome. And this is the image. Of my computer. This is a statue of highlights here. This is a famous statue of Genghis Khan in Mongolia. It's on that list of like my bucket list of places I want to go before I die. And this, I just use this image to portray the idea that in Mongolia, he's the boss. He is as cool as people. He's the coolest guy you can ever have. He's a really important figure in history. Despite the fact that he's hurt so many people, he's so important in Mongolia. And I use this portion to really talk about the idea of why should we care about all this stuff that happened 8 million years ago. And I'm kind of hoping that the Silk Road ideas that I talked about get to that point. And here I'm going to maybe stray a little bit on the bigger argument about how it affects us. But you can certainly say that the Chinese technologies would not have reached Europe without the Silk Road and the trade and the globalization that happens as a result of the Mongolian Empire. And with that, the Europeans are able to start colonizing several hundred years before they normally would have been able to because of Chinese technologies that were presented to them. And you could certainly make arguments that Europeans would have not begun colonizing as quickly as they had without the Mongolian Empire, which sets us back maybe, I don't know, 100 years or so. So the Mongols have made an incredible even impact on Asia, of course, because they've mixed culture throughout the region, but they've also made it possible for us to flourish and us to be, I guess, up to date as technologically as we are today. So that's why they're my favorite empire, because they're just awesome. They conquer so much land, and they're not as notable as I think they should be. I think they've made a greater impact on history than even we can talk about in our history classes. So my hope for this is just to talk about something that's super passionate to me. I love talking about this, and hopefully give you more than just being interested in the topic. So that's what I got for you guys. Thank you.
Apart from Mulan blowing them up with firecrackers, what was like the ending of the Mongolian?
Yeah, that's a good point. So what happens? Genghis Khan is able to get his. I talked about his sons and how they're able to make peaceful things happen. But just with so much territory, the grandsons of Genghis Khan start splitting up. And they don't operate so well. They split into this four that big hunk of territory I showed you guys earlier. Splits into 4 different sections, like Alexander's empire did as well. And just from there, they start to disperse as their enemies start to rise up. So it's really the conquering happens on a 2-generational thing. When you hit grandsons, it stops working as well. Well, what do you think?
Do you know any numbers as far as population in 1279 of the Mongolian Empire?
Yes, yeah, they have about, well, I have it right here. It's I hope I didn't talk about that. 11 million square miles and 100 million people are under their jurisdiction, which is really cool. I didn't throw this in there, but I should have. The Mongols never have an army that's bigger than 130,000 people, and they're able to govern. That 100 million people that way, and that just speaks to, just the way that they were able to make peace happen. It also speaks to the quick dismissal of the empire, because that's just what happened. So yeah, that's a pretty cool statistic I did throw out there. Thanks for bringing it up, Brad. What do you think?
I was going to talk about the star marker or whatever.
Okay.
Okay. So Genghis Khan, he had a specific genetic marker, like a mutation on his Y chromosome.
Okay.
So the way they can tell a descendant is because all the male descendants of him will have that, because the male passes on the Y chromosome.
Okay, and only he has that.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, that's interesting. There we go. So that makes sense. Thank you. I appreciate it. Any more questions?
Science.
Do you plan to continue this research for your thesis?
I've thought about it a lot. The thing is, I talked to a guy named Dr. Kron, who's in the history department. He does an ancient civilizations course, and I just said, man, this is my thing. Is there any possibility of even classes, or do you even talk about it much in your ancient civilizations course? And he's like, man, it's just not, there's nobody at this university that's even got the expertise to really even say much about it. And in fact, he said there's not really anybody from the state, except for one guy at the University of Arkansas that has anything to do with that has probably the possibility of doing that. So, and I talked to Adam a little bit as well. Adam's pretty good at the Chinese, the Mongolian occupation of China, so Kublai Khan, and maybe a little bit of Marco Polo. He's given me some books on the topic. So it might be hard finding an advisor to talk about it, but this is, I don't know, I have to work out something with one of those 2 guys maybe perhaps and get stuff going. So I'd like to, but I'm not 100% sure if that's what they're going to choose to do.
They're looking for another Asian historian position.
When do you think it's going to happen?
I just got an announcement the other day about they're interviewing the candidates. You can meet up next.
So that's potentially like next year.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. Okay, nice.
Great timing.
Okay, there you go.
I understand why a fourth of Inner Mongolia is represented, but why way down in Afghanistan and Hazara is over about 2/3?
Yes, that's a great question. All I can say is that that's really strange, because I think what's interesting about that is that the people who are taking over that region are the grandsons of Genghis Khan, but they're the grandsons of his son that wasn't maybe his son. So I'm not 100% sure about. I can't really answer that question so much. I don't know.
Because they had a lot of
Yeah.
because they had a lot of sons.
Yeah.
They did a lot of raping and pillaging.
Yeah. True. So I don't know. I can't say that so much, but that's interesting. I'm sure somebody with more expertise is looking into that for sure. I saw somebody else there. Oh yeah.
Do you plan on becoming a professor? Because
No.
you would be really good at it.
I appreciate it. Again, you gotta do a lot of. I'm still trying to figure out in my history courses how to jump the gap between contemporary history and historical history, and it's weird. It's a different dynamic. We're all kind of learning the difference between just liking something and then saying we're going to be academically devoted to this. So I don't know. That step kind of frightens me a little bit, and I'm not interested. I'm not super interested in the topic. I'd like to learn more about it. I'm not so sure I want to try to teach people. Maybe just share my passions with people. Do stuff like this. So anyway, thanks for the encouragement. I appreciate it.